Hi, and welcome to this episode of Brainy Moms, brought to you today by Learning RX Brain Training Centers. I am your host, Dr. Amy Moore, coming to you from Colorado Springs, Colorado. I am joined by my co-host, Sandy Zamalis, coming to us from Stanton, Virginia. And we are excited to bring you a conversation with our guest today, Laura Reardon. Laura is a parent coach and the founder of Laura Reardon Coaching. She is also a certified behavior specialist, a Gottman Institute trained emotion coach, and a childhood anxiety coach. She helps parents create their personalized parenting plan, a customized 3-step plan for how to respond to their biggest parenting challenges in a way that sets them up for success in managing their own emotions and behavior. It sets their kids up for success in managing theirs and shows them how to solve their problems effectively. Laura's goal is to create more peace in our world, one family at a time. Welcome, Laura.
Hi, Laura. We're so glad you're with us today. So I work with families daily, and I'm a mom whose kids are older now, so I'm not in the daily grind of parenting, but I've really noticed a huge uptick in parenting coaches as a profession. And in the last 5 years or so, especially, what exactly is a parenting coach, and how did you find yourself in this specific niche?
That's a more complicated question than you might even realize. And I'll tell you why I say that. I spent the first, I would say, maybe 2 years trying to figure out the same answer. And what I mean by that is that I think that there are the traditional coach, and what I mean by that is the traditional coaching model is a model that is based on long-term work in which the coach supports the client in working towards their long-term goals. And it's based on the foundation that the answers are not coming from the coach, but the answers are coming from within the client. And so the coach's role is to support their client in asking reflective questions that lead them towards finding their own answers for where they want to go. And that's a really powerful model that is very effective. And what I learned, or maybe actually just kind of thought about myself from a really practical point of view of when I was parenting young children, is the commitment in terms of time and investment of working with a coach who typically is looking for their client to start with a 3 or 6 month package. It can be really overwhelming from my point of view. And so I do work with clients who are interested in that long-term work in a traditional coaching model. But I created something different. I created something that, from my perspective, in terms of how I wanted to help parents, is something that I didn't really see that it existed, and I felt it would serve a useful purpose. It's something called personalized parenting plans, which is what I created. And it serves the purpose of bridging all the wonderful ways that parents can learn effective parenting strategies through books, podcasts, classes, but in a way that's personalized to their specific challenge, to the individual temperaments of the people within their family, and in a way that is, customized just for them. And it's been my experience is that when you take the learning and personalize it to your individual situation, it's sort of there that the magic happens. And that's where the learning turns into action that creates the positive change that you're looking for. So I work with parents on a 1-hour Zoom call. They bring to me their biggest parenting challenge, and together we create a customized plan for how to respond in a way that sets them up for success in managing their own emotions and their kids in setting their kids up for success in managing theirs. And then there are for some people, that's all they need, and they're off and running, and they can check back in with me on occasion as they need to. And then for others who really do want to segue into more longer term work. But it's a way to do what is my passion, which is to turn the question from what is a parent coach to who is your parent coach. And I really do feel passionate about doing that. And the way to do that, from my perspective, was to make personalized support as accessible as possible for as many people as possible. So I'm not your traditional coach, I guess, is the short answer.
So I have a more philosophical question. The tagline on your website says helping parents grow. And so when we think of challenging behavior issues, we're focused on the child's challenging behavior, right? And so what was the thinking process behind choosing that tagline? Was that intentional, the way you focused that on the parent rather than the child?
Yeah, absolutely. We could use that, we could reference that tagline regarding any parenting challenge, but using it related to managing emotions and behavior, which is what I specialize in. The starting place is always us, and the starting place is always our ability to manage our own emotions and behavior. And from that place, we can support our kids in learning to manage their own.
Yeah, I love that. And so when you have a parent coming to you, is that something that you say up front? Like, how do you help a parent change their thinking process or shift their paradigm to, hey, this is about something that I need to learn and I need to change in order for my child then to solve that problem?
Yeah. So I guess my starting place is to create a lot of compassion and understanding for why that is. So I always start by educating my parents with some just really basic brain science about why it makes so much sense that our kids have big emotions and big behaviors, but also why it makes so much sense that we have big emotions and behaviors, because we're all being challenged with our instinct to get triggered into our fight, flight, or freeze response, which is what happens when we are experiencing big emotions or experiencing unmet needs. And so, from a kid's perspective, when our young child gets the blue cup and they wanted the pink cup, or when our older kid has to turn off their video game and start doing their homework, or when they had a really stressful day, or they didn't get enough sleep or enough good nutrition, or enough downtime, and on, those big emotions and unmet needs can trigger our kid into a threat response. And so their automatic instinct is to lash out or to shut down. And the lashing out from our kids' perspective can look like, anything from screaming and yelling, hitting, kicking, acting, communicating in a disrespectful way, or acting in a defiant way. Or for our kids who shut down, it can look like they're shutting down emotionally or physically. And so when that happens, and as parents, we are experiencing that together with our child, that we are getting yelled at, or observing them kick their sibling, or they're being disrespectful or defiant, it triggers really big emotions in us. And added to that, as parents, we're typically not getting enough sleep or enough connection with other adults, or downtime, in other ways, other core needs of ours that need to be met in order to keep us regulated. And so what happens is then our automatic instinct, like our kids, is to also lash out or shut down. And from a parent's perspective, that can look like yelling, punishing, blaming, shaming, or withdrawing physically or emotionally from our kid. And so I just like to start with creating that foundation of compassion and understanding for our kids' behavior and for our behavior.
Yeah. So you help them normalize that response.
Yeah, exactly. And so my hope in doing that is when I help them to normalize that response, I'm creating an environment in which, just like for our kids, we want to create an environment in which they are not feeling defensive, but rather they're feeling open, flexible, ready to, listen and problem solve. I'm hoping that in the same way we want to create that environment for our kids, I'm hoping that I'm helping to create that environment for the parents that I work with, so that, again, they're not feeling defensive, but they're feeling open.
Yeah, I mentioned that, I'm out of the parenting part or phase of my life at the moment, but I do work with families daily. And maybe it's just, because of the nature of what I do, but it does feel like there's a big uptick in behavioral issues and shutting down and a lot of fight, flight, freeze responses. And a lot of parents feeling paralyzed with how to manage those behaviors. Are you seeing that in your community and who you work with? You hear about it on social media too, kids melting down in school or having difficulty in normal settings, especially since the pandemic. So I'm curious your observations on that.
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think it just makes a lot of sense that our kids are getting triggered more often and more easily into their fight, flight, or freeze response, because we get triggered into our fight, flight, or freeze response when we're feeling threatened or unsafe in some way. And the messaging during COVID was, we're not safe. And so it makes a lot of sense then that our kids, after getting the message of we're not safe, would then be more easily triggered into feeling unsafe. And it's when we're triggered by our threat response that we're going to get those reactions. So I think that that's why we're seeing more of that behavior. And I think in terms of from a parent's perspective, I think that what we're taught to do as a culture, I know I was when I was parenting in my early years, is that we feel like it is our job to, in many ways, to respond with, the traditional parenting tools that we're taught. If we think about it through the lens of fight, flight, or freeze, and that our behavior is triggered, unconsciously triggered into this automatic, defensive behaviors, then if we take that a step further and we think about our traditional parenting tools, such as, for example, punishing, or, you could say consequences. Natural consequences are one thing, but when we get into consequences, sometimes, people like to use that word, but really they're thinly disguised, punishments. And so when it's our automatic reaction to respond to our kids' big behaviors with punishment, then what can happen is that triggers in them, well, one or two things happens. Either we were just coming at this and our kid really wasn't doing anything wrong, but we were low in sleep, had a tough day, and we're kind of at the kind of on empty, and so we just kind of lashed out. And so what happened is we just triggered our kid into a threat response. Or if it's happening that our kids, having big behaviors, and then we're calm maybe, but we're just using the tools that we're taught to use, like consequences and punishments, and then that creates big emotions in our kid. And so what that serves the purpose of is escalating their big emotions and then escalating their threat response, which turns into yelling and fighting and endless conflicts that are not getting resolved effectively. So when we think about our parenting tools through that lens, it makes sense that they don't work.
Absolutely. So then what tools do work?
Yeah. So as I said earlier, it always starts with us. So when I work with parents, I essentially we work on sort of a 1-2 goal here. And the first goal is to support ourselves as parents. And then, then how do we support our kids in responding more effectively to their emotions and behaviors? So to start with ourselves as parents, which is where we always start, there's three quick steps that I would walk a parent through. And the first step would be looking at your environment. And I know parents are so sick of hearing this, yeah, we know we need more sleep. Yeah, we know we need to get out more with our friends. We know we need to meditate. And so I think it's tough because I think that, parents can feel overwhelmed when we talk about self-care and creating an environment that supports their well-being, because it can feel like one more thing. I would just share from my perspective, a little bit of a different lens to look at that through. I would encourage is, or one way that we can just think about it that may be a little bit more helpful. As I know, when I was a parent of young children, I did truly believe, forgive me, I now know better. I did truly believe that I was being a better parent by not going to the gym, not going out with friends. I was that parent that was always there for my kids. My whole life was my kids, and I never did anything for myself. And I thought that was like a badge of honor. Well, I get it now. That's dumb. That doesn't help my kids. It certainly doesn't help me. But nobody was telling me back then about the why. I'm a big the why person. Like, if I understand the why something's important, then I feel a little bit more motivated to make that happen. And so now that I understand the why of me setting myself up for success and managing my emotions can help me do the thing that as a parent I really wanted to do, which is to help my kids learn to manage their emotions and behavior effectively, then I'm going to feel a little bit more motivated. One silly trick you can do is you can kind of make a list of the things that take up your day that benefit your well-being and those that deplete your well-being, and just consider doing a switch. Pull one thing out and put one thing in. There's so many different ways to look at that and ways to make that happen. But one small example is that 10 minutes or more we all spend when we wake up in the morning scrolling through social media. We could switch that out with something that benefits our well-being, and that can be really personalized depending on what works for you. It could certainly be 10 minutes of meditation. It could be journaling. It could be reading a book. It could be whatever supports your well-being and starts you off on your day in a way that is filling your cup instead of depleting your cup. So that's step one, is our environment and setting that up to support our well-being. And if you'd like, I can go on quickly to the other two, but if you have questions.
Absolutely. Yeah,
okay.
Keep going.
So the second one is an in-the-moment tool that I created called the ABCs for keeping calm. So and so this is in that moment where your kid is screaming because they got the wrong color cup, or because your older kid is yelling because you're telling them it's time to turn off their video game and do their homework. So A is for awareness, and awareness means that we want to start noticing our thoughts and our feelings and our body sensations, and start noticing what is present for us. What are we noticing about those things in that moment just before we get triggered into our own fight, flight, or freeze response right before we start lashing out or shutting down. It's obviously easier said than done, but the more we start practicing present moment awareness in little moments throughout our day, and the more we start paying attention to ourselves and how we feel in our body, what thoughts we're having or what feelings we're having, when we're starting to feel that rising sensation of then we can get better and better at pausing before we lash out or shut down. So that's awareness. B is for breathe. We can take a deep breath in and let it out, letting our exhale be longer than our inhale, and that can serve the purpose of helping us tolerate our uncomfortable thoughts, feelings, or body sensations, instead of responding to them by lashing out or shutting down. And breathing is a tool that works for a lot of us. I know that it works for me, but of course it doesn't work for everybody. And so there's lots of other ways to customize that. So we can think of B for breathe as symbolic of that thing that helps us tolerate our feelings instead of lashing out or shutting down. And then C is for cognitive thinking. What we can do is we can tune in to our thinking brain and consider the most helpful response. And so an example, gets so personalized and customized depending on whether we're working with the parent or the child and whether what the situation might be. But to just offer an example of what that could look like, as a parent, we could consider our thoughts. Are we having that thought in that moment? I'm a bad parent because I just yelled? Or are we having a thought, my kid's a bad kid because they made me yell? And we can consider a more helpful thought. We can consider a more compassionate thought. Parenting is really hard, and it makes sense that I feel like yelling, or it makes sense that I yelled. And we can think also, being a kid can be really hard. And instead of reacting with judgment, reacting with curiosity. What are those big feelings and unmet needs that are underneath your behavior? And that those ABC steps can help take us from a place of being triggered to a place of being calm. And again, that's an in-the-moment tool. It's sometimes a tool that can be implemented all at once. And sometimes we need to take a pause at that B step, at that breathe, or whatever works for you in terms of breathing, because sometimes that means we actually need to take a 20-minute break in our bedroom. Of course, depending on the age of our children, safety first, and whatever we need to do to ensure that. But especially in the beginning, or dependent on the level of the situation. Sometimes one breath might be enough. One deep breath might be enough to recenter us and prevent us from lashing out or shutting down. And sometimes it's going to be 20 minutes of breathing or whatever works for you. So obviously, again, it's personalized for yourself, your individual self, and the individual situation. But that's a quick in the moment tool. And then the third step is, we are inevitably, even when we're practicing creating an environment that sets us up for success, and even as we're practicing implementing this tool in our lives, we are inevitably going to still lose it sometimes. And so when we do, we can repair. And when we repair with our child, we restore safety and we restore regulation. And so we can apologize. We can let them know that's something that we're working on getting better and better at, which role models a growth mindset. Just in the same way, we want to let them know it's okay when they're going to lose it, and they're going to keep trying, and they're going to get better and better at it too. And then if we find ourselves losing it on a really regular basis, we can step back and reflect on what might be triggering us. Is it something that's happening in the present moment that's causing us to get triggered so often? Again, an unmet need. Is there really a change that needs to happen in our lives, a problem that needs to be solved? Or we can consider if it's something from our past that may be triggering us in that moment. Is it, excuse me, is it when our kid uses a certain tone of voice, or is it when our kid's not listening to us, for example, that we tend to get triggered? And we can consider, is that reminding us from something that happened in our past, perhaps in our own growing up years? And we can reflect on that, and we can, if we think that might be, what's happening, a way to, process through that in a way so we can be free from that impacting our present day, is we can reflect back on what happened. We can consider how we felt about what happened. We can consider how it's impacting our present, and we can end with a message of resilience. For example, I know that my parents loved me and tried my best. And I can, I can do this thing differently in my current family. So that's a way to reflect on and process something that might be happening from our past and impacting the present in a way that can help us to become free from that.
So I want to revisit that idea of repair and restoring safety. So what is your recommendation on the time interval from when you lost your temper or said something that you shouldn't have said to your child, or regret saying that and you want to repair that? Do you do that immediately, or do you wait until your child has calmed down so they can receive it? What is your recommendation there?
Yeah, I think that's, to your point, so dependent on the situation, depending on our level of reactivity and their level of reactivity. You got right to the heart of the issue, because even if we're regulated enough that we can quickly come to awareness and quickly apologize, our kid may not be ready to hear it if they're too reactive in that moment, and vice versa. So yeah, I think it's just using your judgment. The most important thing is that you need to be in a place where you're ready to repair. And so that's the number one thing. And again, that can sometimes happen quickly and sometimes it doesn't. So I don't think I think the timing is important, in that you want it to be at a time when you are ready to offer a repair and your child is ready to receive a repair. So from that perspective, timing matters. But that said, I think what really matters is that it happens. And I made a repair with my teenage daughter this summer for something I did when she was much, much younger. And so we can repair at any time, and it has value. It always has value.
Yeah. And I think that it's important for us to talk about too, that it's great that we go and repair, and we absolutely have to apologize ourselves when we've crossed that line and hurt our child, even though we didn't mean to. But those words can't be taken back, right? So like every time we say that, if we follow it up with an apology, fantastic. But then we have to take one step further, like you said, and examine what triggered us in the first place, and what do we need to change to prevent ourselves from losing it the next time, right? Because we do damage our child when we say things that hurt them, even though we apologize afterwards, right? And so if we continue to do it again and again and again, just saying I'm sorry isn't going to change the fact that we're repeatedly hurting our child with our words, right? So we really have to look at ourselves as well, like beyond that initial apology, right?
Yeah. And I think that part of what we want to do in support of that is to help our child understand that they are not responsible for our emotional regulation, that we are responsible for our own emotional regulation. And so the language that we use when we apologize matters. We all have received that apology of, well, I'm sorry you felt that way. And that's not an apology. An apology is when we take responsibility for our own behavior. And when we say, I'm sorry, just some version of this, I'm sorry, I got that wrong. I really wish that I had responded in a different way. If I could do it all over again, this is how I would have liked to have responded. And we can always request a do-over. Can we try again? And when we can simultaneously take responsibility for our behavior and not make it our kids' responsibility, the way we behaved, and at the same time, we can offer ourselves compassion and show understanding for, I got it wrong, and that's okay, because I mean, it's not okay. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not okay, but it really is important. But it is okay. I mean, it's like, as parents, we want to say, but it's not okay, but it is okay. It is okay because it's our humanity. We are not robots. We can't get it right every time. I wish we could. I wish I could. It's not the way that life works. And when we can role model compassion for when we get it wrong, and role model a growth mindset of, so I'm going to try to learn from this and I'm going to try to get better from this. That's really ultimately the most important lesson you could potentially argue that we could teach our kid, because the way that will impact them is that through that has the potential to impact them throughout their entire lives. I got it wrong. I can offer compassion and understanding to myself, and I'm going to try to get it right the next time. And that's a really powerful thing to role model. And even as a parent, I wish that I went into parenting with that understanding, because I now am at peace with the fact that I did not always get it right as a parent in my parenting. And I continue to not always get it right. And I always used to say this thing joking, but I was really not joking. I would say, I wish I could live my whole life all over again with the knowledge that I have today. And I said it jokingly, but it really reflected my true feelings, because it was really hard for me to get it wrong, especially when it came to something that I cared so much about and I wanted to get right. And yet I've really come to be at peace with the fact that it's getting it wrong, because as parents, we get it wrong so often. It's the getting it wrong that creates the opportunity to learn what we need to learn to get on the path towards getting it right in the future. And that is just the way life works. And so that was a hard lesson learned for me. And so if we as parents can get our kids on the path towards accepting that in a positive way with compassion and a growth mindset, that again, that's powerful.
I love that. Especially, in my center, we see all the time, that fight, flight, freeze is triggered when we're asking someone to do something hard, right? Or something they need to practice a little bit more. So there's a huge fear of failure, or, not being able to cognitively be aware of why you're feeling anxious about a task or feeling overwhelmed by a task. Do you have recommendations for parents when those things come up? I'm thinking in my head, like sitting at the table for homework and, all of a sudden there's a meltdown that feels like it came out of nowhere. And how to,
it's too hard. I can't do it. Yeah.
And how to bring that child back in, because that's the other side of the coin that, I've been thinking a lot about is, how do we help our kids to embrace I can do hard things, and that it's okay to be uncomfortable, and that it's okay to fail. That's how our brain learns. How do we model that more effectively?
Yeah. So I would encourage parents or professionals or whoever is working in the care of children to consider going through their own ABCs to get regulated and centered themselves. And then we can not teach our kid the ABCs, because that's not going to be helpful, because until our kid has the ability to self-regulate and say, oh, there's a tool, I could put that tool to use, that's going to be of no use to them. But what we can do is we can support them and hold their hand throughout that tool. And this is how that would look. So for awareness, when our kid is in this, case, for example, remind me again, the example you wanted to use is, was it?
I was just thinking the one that we see a lot is
we can use
the
a
homework
specific
example. Yeah, it's the homework.
Yeah, let's use.
We're sitting at the table. Everybody's tired. It's been a long day. The math word problem hits the table, and then there's tears and broken pencils, maybe a slam door or two.
Yeah. So the first place we want to start is awareness, and we can help our child into awareness and into acceptance. So we can, in that moment, be present to our kids' struggle in a way that communicates the message: you're not a bad kid. You are a kid that is struggling right now, and I am here to support you as you're learning new skills and you're growing. And when we can start with that mentality of helping them into awareness, that we see that their behavior is driven by big emotions and unmet needs, and that we are here to help them, that can help them learn to tolerate those uncomfortable experiences of the sensations of unmet needs or the sensations of big emotions. And added to that, if there's a strategy that we feel it could help support them in that moment in tolerating where they're at, again, B for breathe. We can always say, or even not say, but do. We can just start taking some deep breaths, And sometimes, again, that just takes away all the defenses of saying, take some deep breaths. No. But again, that's not going to work for all our kids. And so we know our kid, and sometimes a lot of times our kids need to move in that moment. And, we can just, if we have the opportunity to take a break in that moment and go out in the yard and play, or go for a walk, that's great. If we don't, we could, come up with another strategy that might work in the moment. Let's do 10 wall pushes. Let's do 10 jumping jacks. Whatever that's really personal work, where we need to, figure out what's going to work for your kid in that moment. But again, we're helping our kid develop emotional strength, develop the capacity to be with their uncomfortable emotions without lashing out or shutting down. Because instead, what we want them to learn to do is to respond more effectively. We want them to get their needs met, and we want to help them get their needs met in more effective ways. And that's really what managing emotions and behaviors is about. So then we go to step C, and we use our cognitive thinking brain to consider a different way of looking at that. And so in this situation, what we might want to do is to create some internal motivation. Again, it really depends on the specific challenge that the kid is having. But if it's, for example, a matter of, not wanting to do their homework or not being motivated to do their homework, oftentimes the best way to approach those situations is to ask reflective questions and to give our kids a lot of autonomy, because when we do that, that can create the motivation to do the thing as opposed to doing the thing to avoid the punishment or to get the reward. And so, we might want to ask questions like, so how can I support you in getting this homework done? Or, so, all right, we can have, limits. And when it comes to homework, parents have different ways of looking at that, and whatever's right for you and your values is what's right. But so we could use two different examples. For some parents, they might look at that situation and identify homework as a boundary. This is something we need to do. And so, so that's the boundary, and then giving our kid a lot of autonomy around how that thing gets done. And maybe just like having a brainstorming session of, oh, geez, okay, so we know we have to do the homework. It's just like, come up with a plan of how we can really set you up for success, and then ask a bunch of questions like, geez, what room works best for you to do your homework in? What time of the day works best? How can I support you in doing that? Is it better if we're in the room together? Is it, whatever? Again, there can be a whole slew of different things to consider, but really giving our kid a lot of influence in how to set themselves up for success in that. And then there are some parents that, again, this can really vary with the age of your child as well, but look to natural consequences to play a role in this as well. Because again, it's about creating that internal motivation. And so if our kid doesn't do their homework and then they go into school the next day and experience the natural consequence of not doing the homework, it might be that they come home the next day feeling more motivated to do that homework.
So you talked about it being kind of a 1-2 strategy. So you had the 3 steps for the parents, the ABCs, all of that. And then the section 2 is specific to the child. Did we talk about that?
It's really similar. There are also 3 steps for our kid. The first step is also environment. As is always the foundation for setting us up for success. Step 2 is holding our child's hand through the application of the ABCs. And step 3 is also reflection, as it is for ourselves. But in this sense, we want to reflect with our child on what happened, because there are times when we can go to that step C in the moment, but not often. Most of the times that step C is going to happen later in a calm moment when we're both regulated and ready to problem solve. And so what we can do is reflect on what happened and help them identify, we can ask questions like, we want to always start with, we always want to start with awareness and acceptance. So we want to come at it from that compassionate place, not that judgmental place. And we can start with, I noticed you were really struggling with your homework. And we can ask questions. And so a lot of those questions that we talked about a moment ago are those questions that we can ask in the time of the reflection. However, we were really kind of focused on just getting the homework done. What is often happening in addition to that is that layer of, again, managing your emotions and your behavior. It's one thing to be trying to create some internal motivation and problem solving about how we're going to get homework done in our family. But it's a really another layer if in that moment where our kid is struggling, that they're lashing out or shutting down. And so that's when we can, in that reflective conversation and the calm moment afterwards, we can ask questions like, how are you feeling in that moment? And where were you feeling that within your body? Because there's a lot of research to support that when we can become aware of where we feel our feelings in our body, that's correlated with emotional regulation. And a piece of that is because we feel our feelings first, in our body as body sensations before they can travel to our brain, where we can identify words to label those emotions. And so it's almost like a little head start on knowing what's happening for us. And if we can be tuned into if we can help our kid to tune in to how their emotions feel in their body, then that can be a foundational step towards learning to become aware, which again is that first foundational step in the ABCs. So when we ask them those reflective questions in the time after whatever happened, that can help them start to build the skills for being able to become more aware of when they're feeling triggered by what's happening in their body. And then B, we can reflect back on, geez, in the moment, I suggested you take a deep breath, and that seemed to really upset you. That didn't help you at all. What would be helpful the next time? What would be something that would help you feel a little calmer in the moment? And again, we can brainstorm that, and then again, we can be asking them questions about their thoughts, because their thoughts can really influence their emotions and their behavior. And so we can also have a reflective conversation about what was going on in your head at that moment. What were some of the thoughts that you were having? And it might be that they were having, for example, self-critical thoughts, and those thoughts might have been really triggering their behavior. And so if that's the case, we can talk about how we can acknowledge our thoughts with compassion, and we can choose a different thought to focus on. We can consider a more helpful thought, and we can encourage them to identify their own language. We can say, oh yeah, I can see why you would feel really frustrated, and that makes sense to me. Again, it's always about awareness and acceptance. And what would be a more helpful thought? And again, when we can get them on board with identifying the solution, whether it's how to set them up for success in getting their homework done, or whether it's how to set themselves up for success in how to respond with different thoughts when they become aware they're having a self-critical thought, the more likely they're going to be to actually want to do that thing. As opposed to if we tell them, nobody wants to be told what to do. And so as parents, we have so much life experience, and we have so much wisdom that I wanted to tell them what to do. I knew what to do. I did the right thing. But when we do that, it just gets us the opposite thing than what we want, because it's our natural inclination to not like to be told what to do, even as adults. And so we're better off, again, creating that internal motivation. And when we do that, we get them, we get their buy-in, and also we develop confidence, and we develop competence. So there's lots of benefits to getting our kids involved in problem solving.
Absolutely.
So let's zero in on a particularly tumultuous time of parenting. You offer a free audio class for parents, and one of them is how to prepare for your next tween storm. So what's a tween storm? And other than the ABCs that we've been kind of going over, are there other tools that parents can use to prepare for that particular time and big cognitive developmental time of that child's life?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it is coming back to the same tools. And what I talk a lot about when it comes to our tweens is connection, which is, I think that for sure, when we are showing up for our kids with awareness and acceptance of where they're at, that is a hugely powerful way to connect with them, because essentially they're feeling seen and understood and accepted. And that's the most powerful way we can really feel connection with anyone. And so that tool is powerful in that. However, of course, we want to look at our environment, and we haven't gone into too much detail regarding, our kids' environment and how we can set them up for success. But for sure, one of them is to create regular opportunities to connect. And a lot of times as parents, we feel like as our kids get into their tween and teen years, they're not as interested or needing our connection, when in fact, it's the opposite. They're needing it more and more and more. And in fact, our toddler years, or I should say our teen years, look a lot like our toddler years, because really those phases of life are very comparable in terms of the really high emotions and the need for to be seen and accepted for who we are, and the need to learn skills for managing our emotions more effectively. So just to use myself as an example, the one thing I always did, and everyone can obviously, based on their own lives and routines, come up with their own way to have that daily connection outside of times of chaos when we can also connect, but in just our regular day to day. I was always doing something. Actually, I'm not sure if I mentioned this or not, but I spent 20 years running an at-home daycare and working as a nanny. And so I was a busy mom, as we are all busy in whatever we're doing. But somehow, whenever my kids got home, I mean, not every day, of course, there were times that my schedule didn't allow for it, but almost every day, whenever the bus would come down the street, or in later years when the car would come down the driveway, I had this chair in the kitchen, and I would go and sit myself on that chair, and I'd be sitting there every time the kids walked in the house. And they must have thought I did nothing, because all I was ever doing is sitting in that chair. But I was always sitting in that chair when they came home, and it was just that time my kids got into the habit and the routine of expecting me there, and knowing that would be a time that we could connect, and not a time to fire questions, just a time to be present and to be open to them wanting to sit in silence and companionship, for them to having had something exciting at school, I still remember the day they came home and, they had a lockdown, and it was really, so every day is different. And some days are about not talking, and some days are about sharing stories, but it didn't matter. What mattered is that daily being present to them and whatever their needs were in that moment.
I love that. So we need to take a break and let Sandy read a word from our sponsor. And when we come back, Laura, we'd like for you to tell our listeners how they can work with you and what that would look like when we come back.
Are you concerned about your child's reading or spelling performance? Are you worried your child's reading curriculum isn't thorough enough? Well, most learning struggles aren't the result of poor curriculum or instruction. They're typically caused by having cognitive skills that need to be strengthened. Skills like auditory processing, memory, and processing speed. LearningRx one-on-one brain training programs are designed to target and strengthen the skills that we rely on for reading, spelling, writing, and learning. LearningRx can help you identify which skills may be keeping your child from performing at their best. In fact, we've worked with more than 100,000 children and adults who wanted to think and perform better. They'd like to help you get your child on the path to a brighter and more confident future. Give LearningRx a call at 866-BRAIN-01 or visit learningrx.com. That's learningrx.com.
And we're back with our guest parent coach, Laura Reardon. And so, Laura, if our listeners are interested in working with you as a parent coach, what does that look like, and how can they find out more?
Yeah, if anyone would be interested in working personally with me, I would recommend that they go to my website, laurareardoncoaching.com. And on my website, you'll find some blogs that will, if you're interested in going a little bit deeper in understanding some of the topics that we've covered today, will be a reference for you. As Sandy mentioned, I offer a free recording to help parents who are struggling with the tween years and how to set themselves up for success. And also, that is where you could schedule a personalized parenting a personalized parenting plan with me if that's something that you're interested in doing. We'd work together personally. Again, we'd get on a Zoom call, and together we would co-create a customized and comprehensive plan for how to respond to your biggest parenting challenge in a way that sets you up for success in managing your own emotions and behavior, and sets your kids up for success in managing theirs.
If you could give our listeners one piece of advice or one takeaway from our conversation today to get through those tough moments with their kids, what would it be?
Yeah, I guess I just would come back to compassion, because as parents, we're so tough on ourselves. And I think more than ever, I think in a way that I think is great, parents are looking at their job of parenting in a more professional capacity. For example, the saying that used to drive me batty when my kids were younger is when people would say, oh, parenting is not about using your brain. You need to get out and do something. Well, I don't look at parenting that way, and I never did. I always looked at parenting as something that I wanted to educate myself on. And I think that I love the direction that I see things going in terms of parents, everyday parents becoming educated about brain science and how that can create compassion in themselves for them, for themselves and also for their kid. So I think there's a lot of positive ways in which taking parenting to that next level in terms of looking at how we can be parenting in really effective ways is great in a lot of ways. And like everything, there's a downside, and there's so much stress on parents to get it right, or to just, there's just so much stress on parents, again, like, oh, I have to have my whole environment set up to support me, and I have to know this brain science and how I can do this thing and teach my kids this, and you got to be kidding me, I got to work and I've got to do this. And so I think it's positive, but like everything, it's a balance is so important. So I think I always come back to compassion, humanity. We are all doing the best that we can. And I come back to, again, my hard-earned life lesson is that really we can not take joy in this, but we can take meaning in getting it wrong a lot, because it does get us on that path towards getting it right in the future.
I loved your question that you asked at the very beginning of, instead of, what is a parent coach? Who is your parent coach? What do you think is the biggest benefit of reaching out and getting a personal parenting coach?
I think that, again, it's when you take the generic information that is so freely available to us these days in a way that it was not when I was a young parent. And so I think that again is a positive that can have a negative consequence, because there's so much information out there that A, we can get really overwhelmed by it, and B, we can have no idea how to implement it in our family, and C, we can think we're implementing it and getting it wrong and coming to the conclusion, oh, this just doesn't work. And not understanding that it's so important to work with somebody who can support you in customizing what works for you and your family based on your values, based on what kind of parent you want to be, based on what your challenges are and based on what your goals are. And somebody that can have that perspective to say, oh, well, this might need to be tweaked in this way, or this pattern of, might be getting in your way and preventing you from having the success that you want. Or, it's this, it's the personalization of taking all this generic information and how to make that work in your own family. And so I think that that's where the benefit comes of working with somebody that can support you in that.
I love the notion of having like a third party neutral view and perspective. that's away from the emotionality of it as a parent.
Exactly.
That way too.
Be able to identify patterns that are happening that you just are too close to it to see yourself. And it can be really the difference between not getting the result you want and having that result.
Yeah. So we are out of time, but thank you so much, Laura, for your wisdom and encouragement that you've given our listeners today. We really appreciate you taking your time out of your busy schedule to be with us. Listeners, if you would like more information about working with Laura, again, her website is laurareardoncoaching.com. You can reach her on Facebook through @Laura Reardon Coaching. We will put that website and her handles in the show notes so that you can find her. Thank you so much for listening today. If you liked our show, we would love it if you would leave us a 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcasts. If you would rather watch us, we are on YouTube, and you can find us on every social media channel @the Brainy Moms. If you are into TikTok, you can find Sandy @the Brain Trainer Lady on TikTok. That's right, Sandy?
It is. You got it.
Brain Trainer Lady. Okay. So look, until next time, we know that you're busy moms and we're busy moms. So we're out.
Have a great week.